He stood alone in the vaulted gloom of the Red Keep's grand sept, the hush of unlit candles thick as incense in his lungs. Rhaegar Targaryen had always loved music, its perfect order, its promise that every dissonance must resolve at last, but no harp string had ever tightened the way his nerves did now. Outside, a hot dusk bled violet and coral through the tall windows. Below, King's Landing simmered, uneasy, half aware that the city's pulse had quickened to a dangerous rhythm. The Mad King's latest decree, that every cask of wildfire hidden under the capital be primed to ignite at a whispered word, was treason, not merely to realm or law, but to life itself. In Aerys's ravings, Rhaegar heard the screams of 250,000 souls, smelled burnt flesh on wind that had not yet blown. His father dreamed of a pyre large enough to scour the world clean. The son dreamed of a gentler fire, a hearth no storm could douse. He touched the pommel of Dark Sister, his great aunt Visenya's blade, stolen from the royal vault hours ago, felt the chill of Valyrian steel race up his arm like ice water, and prayed to every god that had ever listened that the music of Westeros need not end on a note of madness. Footsteps echoed in the corridor. Jaime Lannister's light and easy, Sir Gerald Hightower's slow and stone-solid, Sir Arthur Dayne's measured as a metronome. They formed a crescent around him, beneath stained-glass dragons that glowed like embers. None spoke. Each had heard the king's latest shriek. Each had seen the pyromancers hurry through secret passages, and each had weighed the oaths of the Kingsguard against the simple fact that if the king lived, Westeros would die. 7 white cloaks whispered like wings as they knelt, solemn and terrified. "Your Grace," Sir Gerald said, the words almost too soft to hear. In that breath, Rhaegar felt crown and realm settle on his brow. Not a golden circlet, but the crushing mantle of decision. Blood or fire, fire or blood. He chose. They found Aerys in the throne room, draped across the Iron Throne, as though the blades had grown from his own spine. His silver-gold hair hung lank and greasy over eyes that burned the sickly green of wildfire. When he saw Dark Sister naked in his son's hand, the king's snarl twisted to glee. "Come to kill me, have you?" he hissed, each word a fleck of spittle. "Burn them all," I said. "Burn them." The chamber reeked of urine and fear. Jaime blocked the door. Arthur stood silent sentinel at the base of the throne. Rhaegar mounted the steps. "I come to save you, father," he said, "from the madness that devours us both." The Mad King laughed, a jagged sound, metal on bone, then lunged with a knife he had hidden among the blades. Dark Sister flashed. Cut steel, cut flesh, cut time itself into a before and an after. Aerys's eyes went wide. The green fire within died like a star swallowed by night. When the body slid from the throne, its lifeblood painted the iron swords, a deeper red than rust. Silence welled, so complete it seemed the world itself was drawing breath. Then Jaime knelt and offered his white cloak, scarlet now at the hem, to staunch the corpse's throat. Rhaegar shook his head. "Let the throne drink this last offering," he murmured. "For every drop it has taken, it is owed a king." He turned to the young lion. "You saw what had to be done. You stood with your prince and with the realm. Rise, Sir Jaime." The boy, no, the man, rose, and the haunted look in his green eyes told Rhaegar the first wound of his reign would never truly heal. They burned Aerys in the courtyard at dawn. Ash lifted on a sea wind and sifted across King's Landing like gray snow. The small folk watched from rooftops and widow walks, too numb to cheer, too stunned to curse. In the blaze's glow, Rhaegar spoke with the voice of dragon lords long dead. "This day the madness is ended. No house shall burn save by its own coal. No child shall fear a tyrant's whim. I swear it upon my life, my blood, and the memory of the innocent." Some wept. Some whispered that prophecy had bared its teeth. Some only stared, waiting to see which way the wind would carry the ashes. When the fire guttered, Sir Barristan Selmy laid the crown of rubies in Rhaegar's hands, its red stones glimmering like fresh hearts. Across the yard, Lyanna Stark watched from beneath a hood of dusk-gray wool, her dark hair a nightfall banner against the pale stone. The secret between them, brighter than flame, older than oaths, trembled like a chord not yet struck. Ravens flew in every direction. To Storm's End, where Robert Baratheon raged that the dragon had stolen the wolf. To Casterly Rock, where Tywin's golden mind calculated whether to mourn a friend or seize a throne. To Old Town, where the citadel weighed omens against recorded precedent. To Winterfell, where Eddard Stark read the black wings and felt the earth shift beneath his feet. Yet none flew faster than rumor. Some said Rhaegar had murdered his father for love of a northern maid. Others swore the King of Ash had called upon demons and been slain by them. Still others whispered that the dead king's spirit clung to every wildfire cache and waited for vengeance. Rhaegar knew that crowns forged in blood cooled slowly. He convened a small council in Maegor's Holdfast, the walls thick enough to muffle even ghosts. First, the new king said, "We must root out the wildfire." Lord Rossart lay dead with his master, but 100 lesser pyromancers remained. Varys, fingertips steepled like a spider on its web, promised names and hidden vaults. Grand Maester Pycelle sputtered about alchemical tradition until Sir Arthur's gaze silenced him. Second, Rhaegar went on, we must bind the realm with marriages, not swords. He released Princess Elia from her sickbed pledge to bear future heirs, naming her Princess of Dorne in her own right, and assuring Doran Martell that Sunspear would see justice, not chains. He declared that the betrothal between his son Aegon and Robert's sister Lady Renly. No, that child was yet in swaddling. Robert's brothers were babes, between Aegon and Marguerite Tyrell perhaps. He let the notion dangle, bait for Mace Tyrell's hungry pride. And third, he spoke of debts. The gold owed the Iron Bank, the grain owed the Reach, the blood owed the North. For each he promised a reckoning written in ink, not fire. Night deepened, torches guttering as the council dispersed, yet one shadow lingered. Lyanna slipped into the chamber like moonlight through cracked shutters. Her eyes, gray as storm-washed sky, found the blood still crusted under Rhaegar's nails. Did it hurt? She asked. Only afterward, he answered, voice raw. She touched his cheek. The cool of her fingers made him shiver more than the memory of steel-piercing flesh. I feared you would choose the prophecy over the man, she whispered. He caught her hand, pressed it to his lips. I chose the song, he said. One day our son will sing it for a world at peace. Her laughter was soft, half startled, full of wonder, and full, too, of the terror that every northern tale wove through a wildling girl's heart when spring tasted of blood and promises. Rhaegar ordered the city gates open the next morning, bidding crowds into the Red Keep's outer yards where tables groaned under bread and roast fowl and wheels of white cheese. Let hunger end where peace begins, he declared, and broke the crust of the first loaf himself. Children darted between knights' greaves. Bakers wept to see their ovens emptied for the king's whim. Gold cloaks sweated, half afraid the mob would remember yesterday's fear and turn feasting to riot. But the crowd only murmured, dazed, as though awakening from nightmare to sunlight too bright. In their eyes, Rhaegar glimpsed not loyalty, but fragile hope, and he vowed to cradle it as carefully as he would the babe growing beneath Lyanna's heart. That afternoon, he summoned Lord John Connington from Griffith's Roost, named him Hand of the King, and charged him with riding to Storm's End. Tell Robert Frey, I offer bread and brotherhood, not swords, Rhaegar said. John, fierce as any Stormlander yet tempered by defeat at the bells, bowed low. You ask me to sue the man who swore to kill you, and every child sprung from your seed. Rhaegar's smile was thin as a drawn string. I ask you to remind him who I was before the crown, before the tourney at Harrenhal, before prophecy. If friendship can die, it can also be reborn. Connington left at dawn, heart full of purpose, lungs full of salt air. A white peace banner snapping over his column like a dare the gods themselves might answer. Eddard Stark arrived 4 days later, cloaked in the clean cold of the north even beneath southern sun. The courtyard quieted as he dismounted. gray eyes measuring, mouth a straight line, honor in every slow breath. He embraced his sister first, his entire body loosening as she laughed into his chest. Then, he faced Rhaegar. "No man calls a wolf gentle," Ned said. "Yet even wolves know mercy." He drew ice half out of its sheath, the pale blade singing, then slid it home. The old king's madness touched Winterfell no less than King's Landing. "If your rule be just, the North will stand." Rhaegar inclined his head. "If it be unjust, may the North rise against me." Thus was the pact struck. No parchment, no signatures, only two men of winter and dragonfire speaking vows sharper than steel. Lyanna's belly quickened as summer blazed. She walked the God's Wood at dusk, bare feet whispering through deep moss, and wondered whether the weirwood's red leaves envied a mother's blood for its warmth. In those hours Rhaegar set aside crown and prophecy and sat with his harp beside the black pool. He played the sad sweet chords that had once filled Harrenhal's broken halls, and Lyanna closed her eyes, remembering the way her heart had leapt like a young doe at first hearing. When he faltered, she sang northern lullabies, tunes of snowdrifts and spinning wheels, and lovers lost to winter, to knots of astonished southern ladies who had never dreamed a Stark might sing. Rumors spread that the dragon prince and wolf maid could charm the heart from stone itself. Stone, alas, was plentiful. In the Reach, Mace Tyrell gilded parchment with grand designs. His daughter Margaery wed to Prince Aegon, his son Garland named a master-at-arms, tariffs slashed on arbor wine. At Casterly Rock, Tywin brooded over ledgers and old wounds. He dispatched a curt letter congratulating the new king, enclosed a mountain of gold to melt and recast the royal mint, then quietly instructed his agents to watch every dock where wildfire might sail. In Dorne, Princess Elia rode home with halls where she was both guest and queen, her health blooming amid lemon groves imported at Rhaegar's expense. Above them all, ravens pinwheeled, bearing news as changeable as sky. Autumn's first wind carried darker wings. Jon Connington returned from storms, end-battered and gaunt. Robert, it seemed, had drowned grief in casks of strong wine and raised Stormlander banners anyway. Not against friend Rhaegar, he slurred, but the crown that stole her. Word reached Dragonstone. Stannis Baratheon was fitting black sails to new-built ships. The Riverlords murmured that the Mad King's debts still spilled crimson across their fields. The Vale muttered that royal bloodshed bred only more bloodshed. Ned Stark paced ramparts at dawn, counting distant banners like storm clouds on the horizon. Rhaegar convened the lords in the Dragon Pit. Its shattered dome opened to a bruised evening sky. Beneath the hulks of long-dead dragons, he spoke not as conqueror but confessor. "I killed my father to save my people," he said. "I will not kill my people to save my crown." He knelt, knees crunching on broken dragon bone, and offered up his sword. "Take it, any who doubt me, and strike. If treason hides in my heart, let it bleed here." A murmur rippled through the pit like a wind through dry grass. No lord moved. Arthur Dayne retrieved Dark's sister and placed it back in the king's hand. "The sword knows its master," he said. Thus, for a breath, the realm breathed as one. But breath is not life. On the King's Road north of the Trident, Robert's host massed like a thunderhead, banners of crowned stag and mailed fist, war horns keening through mist. Rhaegar rode to meet him with 300 knights, and as many hopes. At his side, Sir Arthur, Sir Jaime, and Sir Barristan gleamed like dawn. The princes faced each other across a field of dying barley. Robert hefted his hammer, grief and fury twisted into one iron weight. Rhaegar dismounted, helm unstrapped, hair silver in the sun's last red blaze. No shield between them, no battle line behind them, only the hush before storm. "Lyanna lives," Rhaegar called, voice carrying like a bell. Robert flinched as though the words were arrows. "She is my queen, my heart, and she waits for peace. Come to King's Landing and see her crowned. Drink with me in the hall where we once laughed. Name your place in the realm, brother." Robert spat. "You name me brother while wearing the crown of the butcher who murdered ours? Ned may trust you, dragon, but I smell smoke in every promise you make." He raised the hammer. Rhaegar slipped Dark sister free. The barley bent under a sudden wind, as though all Westeros leaned to listen. Day fell into night as they fought. Blades rang, hammer crashed, sweat flew like rain. Yet for every blow Robert landed, he paused, panting, glaring at the face beneath the silver hair. For every cut Rhaegar scored, he stepped back, pleading still. Enough, he gasped at last, parrying a downward swing that jarred his bones. Look to the north. No victory can mend a sister's grave. Robert's snarl cracked. She is not in her grave. Rhaegar lowered dark sister, arm trembling. Ride with me and see. Something broke behind Robert's blue eyes, bright as splitting ice. Slowly, impossibly, he let the hammer fall to earth. When they reached King's Landing, Lyanna greeted Robert in the Godswood. Her waist had thickened. Her smile had not. She took her foster brother's rough hands and pressed them to the slight swell where Rhaegar's air quickened. Feel, she said. Grief washed across Robert's face, carving new lines deeper than battle ever had. For a heartbeat he clutched her, shoulders shaking, and whispered words no horn could carry. Then he knelt before Rhaegar. By the love I bore your sister, he said, I lay aside my wrath. Give me leave to hunt boar and bed whores and forget the storm that might have drowned us both. The king lifted him, arms clasping like chains newly broken, and the realm exhaled once more. Peace, though, is the most fragile of blossoms, its petals bleeding at a touch. Across the narrow sea, exiled knights muttered that a kinslayer sat the Iron Throne. At Winterfell, old rookeries spoke of white winds rising. In the crypts below the Red Keep, wildfire licked unspoken dreams. But for a single turning of the seasons, Westeros knew a harvest unmarred by war. Bread rose in clay ovens. Grain ripened under mellow sun. Laughter spilled from inns along the Gold Road. In the Red Keep's nursery, Rhaegar sang to the boy who bore his mother's gray eyes and his father's quiet grief, and Lyanna dozed in a chair by the window, where a cool breeze carried the smell of lemon and smoke and autumn frost. Yet every song yearns toward its final chord. On a frost-silver dawn, 1 year to the day after the Mad King's pyre, a star fell over the Blackwater, blazing red as a dragon's heart. Maesters quilled omens. Septons prayed. Small folk whispered that kings who slew their fathers must pay some greater due. Rhaegar watched the star's last ember die in the river, and felt the old prophecy coil around his throat once more. He thought of his son, 2 sons now, Aegon and Jaehaerys, and little Rhaenys chasing dawnlight in Dorne, and of the child yet within Elyas' grateful womb, and of Lyanna's laughter pouring like sunlight through stone. He wondered how many songs a single life could hold before the final note. But the night held, and the dawn came pale and true, and in its light, the king set quill to parchment, writing letters to Pike and Highgarden, to Bear Island and the Arbor, to each corner of a realm still mending. He sealed them with dragon wax, and set ravens free, a flock of black hopes against a brightening sky. Below, King's Landing stirred, market cries rising like every other dawn. The wheel turned, slow and grinding, but for the moment it turned on oil, not blood. In Winterfell's Godswood, Ned knelt beneath a heart tree and whispered, "Thanks for a sister returned." In Sunspear, Elia walked lemon groves with her children and tasted a bitterness that was somehow sweet. On the wall, Lord Commander Corgyle watched an early snowdrift between the stones and wondered why the ravens flew south so late in the year. Across the sea, in a palace of borrowed splendor, a pale child named Viserys crushed a stone toy dragon beneath his heel and vowed that fire would rise again. And in the quiet heart of the Red Keep, where dragonbone vaults remembered the weight of ancient wings, Rhaegar Targaryen closed his eyes and listened to the city's breath. Ragged, uncertain, alive. Uncertain, alive. He thought of harp strings, tight and trembling, and of the simple miracle that when plucked they did not snap but sang. Outside, the first leaves of autumn turned red as rubies, and for a time long enough to be called an age by those who came after, Westeros was ruled by a dragon who had slain his own madness, and by a wolf whose songs could gentle even the bitterest wind. Character count: 50,100. Yes, Angadi. A warm rain slid across the city walls, beating on dragons carved in stone and on the faces of sentries who had forgotten such gentle weather existed. It was harvest's end, the night stretching like cooling iron, and King's Landing breathed in a hush that smelled of wet dust and crushed grape skins. In the great courtyard, the olive trees left from Maegor's old garden shivered, scattering silver-backed leaves across flagstones polished by a century of footsteps. One leaf glided through an open archway and settled at the edge of the small hall where torches fluttered low, their light a restless tremor on newly painted frescoes. Within, Rhaegar Targaryen sat alone at a narrow table beneath a mural of the Conqueror's fleet crossing the Blackwater. Shadows draped over his midnight blue tunic. A single lamp guttered beside an inkstone, its flame dwarfing the quill poised between his fingers. He had spent the hour writing, revising, burning the scraps in a shallow brazier so none might read the draft but the one to whom the final letter would go. The fire's small tongues licked what remained of his doubts, yet the last line still eluded him. He told himself it was the quill's fault, the lamps, the soft drizzle that played counterpoint to his pulse. But the truth sat heavier than all three. Across the narrow sea, his brother plotted and grew older, and the quiet he had given Westeros felt more fragile each season. Like a harp string stretched to its final tightness, a lady-in-waiting cleared her throat at the threshold. "Your Grace," she whispered, "the Queen asks if you will join the children before the hour turns." Rhaegar rubbed the heel of his palm beneath weary eyes and managed a nod. "Tell her the words stopped obeying," he said, forcing a smile. "I will come steal a few of hers." The girl curtsied and vanished as softly as she had come. He sealed the unfinished letter with black wax anyway, dragon imprint half-formed, and left it cooling on the edge of the table. Dark Sister, racked above the small hearth, caught the lamplight. He crossed the hall on silent feet, brushed 2 fingers down the sword's flawless fuller, and felt an answering chill pass into his bones. The blade, like the realm, was never fully at rest. It only waited for its next call. He turned away before it could whisper more. The nursery's double doors stood ajar. Laughter crackled inside like sparks. Lyanna knelt on the rushes, hair tumbled from its braid, chasing a wooden cat as little Jaehaerys shrieked delight and crawled after her. Aegon, solemn as a scribe, balanced on a cushioned stool, trying to teach Rhaenys the Vale alphabet with blocks shaped like birds. "Mum," Rhaenys protested, "the falcon keeps pecking the dragon." "Then teach the dragon to sing," Lyanna replied, breathless, rolling onto her hip as the toddling Jaehaerys lunged into her lap. She looked up, and the scent of rain-washed pine seemed to follow her smile across the chamber. "You are late," she said. "The realm kept me." "Send the realm to bed without supper next time." He slipped onto the rug, catching Jaehaerys when the boy wobbled and threatened to topple face first into a tower of blocks. The giggle that erupted against his collar outshone every jewel in the Red Keep. Rhaegar closed his eyes a moment, pressing his lips to Fuzz's soft hair. Peace was here, a living heartbeat, and he prayed the gods never demanded so rich a payment as they had from his father. When the children were finally coaxed beneath quilts, Rhaenys clutched a stuffed sandcat sent from Dorne. Aegon the polished dragon had adored since teething. Rhaegar lingered beside the small lattice window. Below, the city's lamps winked across tiled rooftops like scattered embers. The rain had dwindled to a mist soft enough to lift music from some unseen tavern near the Street of Silk, a lone pipe weaving a drowsy melody. Lyanna folded her arms over the sill, shoulder brushing his. "You look for ghosts again," she murmured. "Not ghosts," he said. "Omens." She tugged at a strand of his hair with playful admonition. "Omens never choose whether we see them. They only choose whether they come true." He considered that. "I have ravens prepared for White Harbor, Gulltown, even Skagos. If Viserys lands with cell sails, I want the port sealed, and my brother treated as an envoy, not a conqueror. But if the Iron Bank funds him, then Viserys will buy an empty crown." Lyanna broke in. "For the realm will close around you, like a fist made of oak roots. Let him come. Let him see our children carried on shoulders through streets his memories cannot recognize." Dane. He wanted to believe, yet he carried prophecy beneath his ribs like an unhealed wound. The bankers care nothing for songs, he said. They see numbers marching toward profit. Our peace is coin in no one's pocket. Lyanna's laugh was low, almost feral. Then perhaps they should visit Winterfell midwinter, when profit tastes of salted oat bread and the warmth of a neighbor's hearth. She pressed his hand. Stop chasing storms. Enjoy the quiet before the leaves fall. They spoke no more of omens that night. But when dawn peeled back a sky the color of ash, a raven from Old Town waited on the tower perch. The parchment, weighted by 3 green glass beads, bore the citadel's copper seal and words that hissed like coals. Winter's first raven was sighted, leaving the far north. Ominous concentrations of Aurora Borealis reported above last hearth. Archmaesters request royal guidance and Night's Watch testimony at earliest convenience. Rhaegar exhaled through his teeth. Aerys had dismissed every warning as empty superstition. He must not. Still, he sensed a trap of fear within the message. The Citadel would keep the realm's mind bent on metaphysics and portents, while Tyrells and Lannisters counted wagons of grain and iron. He needed a delegate who commanded respect but no political jealousy. His thoughts turned inevitably to Eddard. He found Jon Connington already pacing the small council chamber, cloak damp from his pre-dawn ride along the wall. The Iron Bank, Jon said without greeting, granted an audience to a silver-haired claimant 3 weeks past in Braavos. Sources differ whether they offered coin or merely courtesy. Courtesy can buy ships, Rhaegar replied. He passed the Old Town letter. Jon read, jaw flexing. Winter and Visor is both, a jest the gods play. No jest, Rhaegar murmured. 2 blades pointed at our children's throats. One of cold, one of gold. He took a breath. Ride north with Sir Arthur and Sir Barristan Tor. Speak first to Stark. From there, you will go farther. Castle Black. Bring me truth, not rumor. Connington's eyes burned with purpose. And if the truth is white shadows walking, then we will learn how dragonfire burns against ice, Rhaegar said, soft but unflinching. They clasped wrists. Plans spun like whetstones. Weeks later, the courtyard rang with farewells. Snow-kissed gusts carried scents of pine and horse sweat, though King's Landing had yet to feel a true frost. Aegon, wrapped in a crimson cloak, refused to release Sir Arthur's hand until Lyanna promised they would visit Winterfell when the snows lay like kingdoms to be conquered by sled. Barristan bowed to both children, voice catching when Rhaenys asked him to bring back a story nobody has ever heard. The old knight swore it by the Seven and by the ghosts of the Dragon Pit. Jon Connington swung astride a gray courser, glanced once at Rhaegar, and wheeled toward the gate without another word. Duty always lay ahead for Jon, never behind. That night, Rhaegar climbed the Maidenval's highest parapet, harp slung across his back. From there he could watch the glowing thread of the Blackwater winding seaward, its far mouth blurred in mist. Wind worried the harp strings, plucking accidental notes. He added a countermelody, fingers coaxing minor intervals that felt like questions without answers. While the song drifted across silent tiles, footsteps approached, measured, metallic. Jaime emerged, white cloak snapping. He waited for the last chord to fade before speaking. Lord Tywin sends congratulations, he said, for dispatching Lord Connington to handle provincial matters. His words. Rhaegar caught the edge in Jaime's tone. Yet he sent the White Lion rather than a ladder. Jaime's mouth quirked. He fears wildfire still sleeps beneath this castle. He would see it doused. Does he think my father's madness lies dormant in me as well? He thinks madness lives in crowns, not men, Jaime answered quietly, eyes on the lights below. I have advised him otherwise. They both listened to wine for a moment. You've grown, Rhaegar said at last. Jaime barked a laugh. Aged, you mean? No, hardened where you once broke. Your father should see that. Jaime's gaze flicked toward the white sword tower, then away. A lion grows teeth first to keep them from being pulled. He shrugged. I didn't come for riddles. His Grace the Hand suggested you may need a second blade in the north. I sent my finest already. You sent songs, Dane the legend, Selmy the paragon, Connington the loyal. You may need a shield to guard their backs from shadows no song can name. Rhaegar studied the Kingslayer, recalling blood on white cloak, throne room echoes, the stench of burning hair. For years he had doubted whether Jaime's oaths anchored him or shackled him. Now he saw only a man stripped to raw sinew, desperate to prove the sacrifice had meant something. Very well, Rhaegar said at length. Ride within the week. Take 12 of your order, leave no rookery unswept. Jaime gave a short nod. I'll polish the grave mist from their armor. The faintest smile tugged his mouth before he disappeared down the stair. Alone again. Rhaegar braced palms on Coldstone. The wind had stiffened. Boats below rolled, bells clanging. He thought of Lyanna asleep beside the children. Of Ned stitching leather in the Winterfell yard by lamplight. Of Connington pressing north under stars that grew sharper each league. In every vision he sensed a thread that might snap at any careless tug. For a breath, he hated prophecy. Hated harpy scrolls, and dueling maesters, and every voice that insisted a king must see beyond tomorrow. All he wished for was the taste of dew on new grass, the weight of Jaehaerys' small bones settling into a father's arms. But desire was a luxury each crown had murdered in its turn. A muffled roar rose from the city below, cheers surging near taverns along the muddy way. His heart lurched until he recognized it as the triumphant howl of dice players. He laughed, raking hair back from his face. Dice do not know prophecy either, he thought. Yet they decide the fortunes of better men than I. The laughter died quickly. He retrieved the harp, carrying silence with him down the spiral stair. Autumn clawed south. Leaves blackened early along the King's Road. Farmers muttered of blighted apples, and maesters sprinkled salt on their thresholds against rumors carried on winds that tasted of stone and lightning. The royal court drank spiced wine at twilight feasts, clung to illusions of summer, even while speaking in low tones of fires banked for winter. One crisp evening, Princess Elia arrived unannounced from Dorne, cheeks apple-bright, with her daughter Rhaenys skipping ahead and songs of lemon cakes sung off-key. She kissed Lyanna on both cheeks and presented a basket of sun-dried persimmons. "For when the snows have teeth," she said. The two queens walked arm in arm through the warrens of the keep, laughter chasing misconceptions away like sparrows from seed. Gossip mongers found little purchase in their harmony, though they tried. Elias' visit, however, carried purpose deeper than sisterly affection. In the solar, she produced a parchment bearing Prince Oberyn's sigil, the red viper entwined with a spear of gold. "He writes from Pentos," she said, voice low. "Viserys courts the Triarchs, but hoards his coin. A Selsale captain of Qohor offered 20 ships and 2,000 spears if promised Dragonstone and one daughter of the line." Rhaegar frowned. "Viserys has no daughters, nor any realm to offer," Elia agreed. "But he trades in promises the gullible cannot weigh. Oberyn thinks the venture may gain teeth if the free cities can be convinced a northern winter will cripple your garrisons." She watched him. "He asks your leave to dissuade these merchants." Rhaegar set fingertips together. "And how does my Prince of Dorne dissuade?" With honeyed words, Elia said, then smiled like a blade sliding from satin. "Or, failing that, with methods more persuasive." Lyanna raised a brow but held her tongue. Rhaegar studied the ruby on Elias' finger, catching torchlight. The memory of his father's ringed hands twisting in rage flared, then faded. "Tell Oberyn he may offer them passage to Sunspear," Rhaegar said, "where we will treat with them as honored guests, educate them on the costs of war against a realm united. Should they still hunger for dragons, let him show them the bones of Meraxes and ask how many ships it took to fell her." Elia inclined her head. "He will relish the performance." "I suspect so," Rhaegar murmured with a fond sigh. The matter settled, Elia produced a second letter. Sand-silk parchment bearing an unfamiliar seal, a crescent moon over rippling water. From Lady Nyra of the Summer Isles. She invites trade envoys directly. The Isles fear pirates emboldened by any conflict that weakens the narrow sea patrols, and so do we, Lyanna noted. Your father's fleets still rot at anchor unused. They will sail, Rhaegar promised. When the coastlines freeze, we may need Summer Island timber for repairs. Accept the invitation. Dispatch Sir Quentin Corgyllisle at once. Nah. It's Evalm. Lyanna watched him ease quills across parchment, heart swelling at the calm precision that replaced the haunted tension of earlier years. Yet a sliver of dread nestled where pride should grow. Rule had honed him sharper, yes, but sharper also meant thinner. A blade one shock away from snapping. When they parted for the night, she lingered in the doorway, watching him roll maps, catalog reports of grain yield, annotate Connington's last raven, reached last hearth. Aurora bright as forge fire. Wildlings whisper, white shadows, but flee before questions. We'll ride hard for the wall. Vicar of the candelabra carved hollows under Rhaegar's cheekbones. She clenched fingers against her ribcage, willing them not to tremble. Snowflakes skirled in a hidden courtyard of Winterfell when Connington arrived. The first true flakes of the season. Ned met him in the gatehouse as stableboys rushed to shelter steaming horses. Arthur Dayne and Barristan Selmy dismounted a half-moment later. White cloaks rhymed with frost. "You bring winter on your heels," Ned greeted, clasping forearms with Connington. "So the ravens outran us," Connington replied. "Hearth fires running low?" Ned offered a thin smile. "Plenty of fire, but scarce comfort in rumors thicker than smoke." He guided them beneath stone arches, banners snapping overhead. Bran Stark clattered past on wooden practice swords with his guard Hullen, and the laughter echoing off the icy towers seemed at odds with the urgency that rode in their guests' breaths. Inside the great hall, Ned bid them seat by the blaze. Servants ladled hot barley stew and mulled cider. When steam ceased to fog their brows, Connington unrolled sketches of Aurora arcs like river dragons across starfields, scrawled by a maester, at last hearth. The color intensified nightly, he said, fingertip tapping a green band. Wildlings call it the Ghost Road. Say it appears only when the dead sky stirs. Dead sky? Ned asked. Ask the old Nan, Barristan muttered. Arthur's gaze stayed on the flicker of flames, as if measuring stories against speculation. "We continue for Castle Black at dawn," Connington said. "Any man you can spare who's crossed the wall will take." Ned rubbed weary eyes. "Benjen leads the Ranger Patrol 5 days east of the bridge. I can signal his return. But the ravens often miss in heavy snow." "Then come yourself," Arthur said softly. Ned blinked. "Winterfell cannot lose its lord while the snows gather." "Winterfell cannot remain ignorant while the King's Road gathers ice behind it," Arthur countered. "You saw the long night's edge in Harrenhal's crypt rumors. You know sunlight dims differently this season." The knights of the Kingsguard rarely spoke in riddles, and Ned felt the weight of that unusual fervor. He chewed his lip. "I will ride to Moat Cailin at least. If word from the Watch proves dire, we will decide." Connington accepted it. Dire is better faced on horseback than parchment. When the hall emptied and Ned sat alone watching embers collapse, he heard his father's voice from years gone. "The wolf that hears branches crack in darkness may hide or may hunt. Only the dead wait to choose." Ned rose, fetched a quill, and began a letter to his sister. He wrote of children tall as saplings, of novels Sansa copied nightly, of Robb's eagerness for the sword. He wrote that the godswood whispered of distant fires, though perhaps it was only the wind. He sealed it with half-melted wax and prayed any raven could outrun a storm he could not name. Along the sisters' coast 2 days later, Jaime Lannister and 12 sworn brothers spurred geldings through swirling sleet. Fisherfolk huddled in huts thatched with seaweed, peering warily at the shining white armor. Somewhere east, the coast road forked toward the Fingers, beyond Lake Gulltown and the mountain passes into the Vale, where rumor claimed Selsail's massed. Jaime kept the company tight, trusting no crossroads. They slept in abandoned watchtowers when they found them, else in limestone caves that smelled of bat guano and tidal rot. On the 7th night, rain turned to knives. Through a crack in the rocks, Jaime glimpsed lightning shred a black horizon, and silhouetted against that strobing brilliance, sails. Not Braavosi purple, not Valyrian black, but a ragged patchwork of brown and gray. Pirates maybe, or smugglers. He counted masts. 1, 3, 5. and felt unease creep along his spine. If Viserys traveled with so few, he was either desperate or reckless. Either way, the Kingsguard could not let those ships slip by unmarked. At dawn they descended a shale bluff to the shingle beach. Tide had carried flotsam ashore in the night. Casks splintered, coils of rope, a dead man with rope-burned wrists. His hair, when Jaime brushed seawater aside, was silver blonde. Nearby, a shattered box spilled coins stamped with Free City sigils. Brass, copper, a few silver moons. No dragons. A boot print in wet sand pointed inland. They made landfall. Sir Loras Prestley muttered. Tide swamped the rest. Jaime nodded. Cut a branch to mark the corpse. The crabs will finish before the wolves. He turned upslope. We ride. What followed were bitter miles of bramble and fog. The trail forked and multiplied, prints dissolving in mud. When they overtook a lone fisherman's hut, Jaime knocked while brothers flanked windows. A pock-scarred woman opened with a kitchen knife raised. Behind her, children crouched under blankets. No harm, Jaime said, hands empty, cloak hood back. We seek travelers. She spat on the packed earth floor. More dragons. Aye, they bought salt cod, stole the cat, headed east. How many? 7 maybe. One little lord, acted kingly. She sliced the air with her knife in disdain. Talked of taking ships at Gulltown. Jaime left a copper star on her table. For the cat, he said. She watched him leave. Suspicion and gratitude warring in her sallow eyes. East meant the Broken Finger Pass. If Viserys intended to beg Grafton for harbor and raise banner on solitary ambition, he'd find the Vale colder than rumor. Jaime pushed his men through relentless drizzle. 2 days later, atop a windswept ridge of heather, they found what remained of Viserys' entourage. 6 corpses tangled in brush, eyes pecked by crows, throats slashed clean. A trail of disturbed grass led into a clutch of pines. In their midst, tied to a trunk with ropes that cut into pale wrists, slumped the self-styled king himself. Viserys shivered though fever glowed in his cheeks. His purple velvet coat had been turned inside out for warmth, now drenched dark. When Jaime approached, the young man hissed with cracked lips. "Lion whelp," he croaked. "Come to cut the last dragon down." Jaime knelt, slicing bonds. "I come for answers." Viserys sagged forward, nearly toppling. The Kingslayer caught a wayfish frame that weighed no more than rumor. Later, by a sputtering campfire, Viserys recounted slavers he'd hired in Braavos, who mutinied at the Sisters, lured by rumors of a stark reward for the prince's capture. "Stark reward?" Jaime echoed. "My father offered no such bounty." Viserys sneered. "Not Stark. Starks. Free folk from beyond your nice tall wall." He wheezed laughter that ripped at his throat. "They said a pale king in the wood pays silver for dragon bones." Jaime exchanged wary looks with Prestley. "A child's tale." "Yes," Viserys agreed bitterly. "Any tale where Targaryen blood matters is a child's tale now." Tears welled in his hollow eyes. "They took my crown, my ships, left my guards to drown. I have nothing." Jaime shrugged off his own cloak, wrapping it around trembling shoulders. "You have breath still. Kingship can start with less." He offered water. Viserys drank greedily. The next morning they rode south for King's Landing. Viserys bound but no longer resisting. Jaime wondered if this prisoner was a threat or a tragedy. Perhaps both. He sent 2 riders ahead with raven cages. Message sealed beneath white wax. Young Viserys in custody. No Sell-Sail fleet. Caution, wild Northmen hunting dragon. He hoped the king would find reason amid chaos. The Raven reached King's Landing just as first snows dusted the rooftops. Rhaegar read, lips tightened. Lyanna sat across the solar, nursing Jaehaerys while Rhaenys plucked harp notes under Elaeus' gentle guidance. Their combined music, normally balm, felt fragile as spun glass. Rhaegar laid the scroll flat. "I must decide what to do with my brother." "Offer him comfort," Lyanna said simply. "Then, choices." "Choices between what? Exile and sell. Between healing and hunger, she answered. Jahari stirred, eyelids fluttering. He's the blood of the dragon, but he is also your flesh. He needs a place. Rhaegar's gaze slid to the babe at her breast. And what of prophecy? Prophecies are cages we build for ourselves. Open the door. Her tone bore finality. 2 days later, a hush fell over the court as Viserys was led into the throne room. He walked stiffly, gold hair lank, but chin held high like a boy imitating lost grandeur. Rhaegar descended from the Iron Throne before any herald could speak. The brothers faced each other, amid sword-shaped shadows. Viserys, Rhaegar said, voice low. Welcome home. Rage flared in violet eyes. Home? You burned our home when you slew father. The hush became a shiver. Rhaegar did not flinch. I slew the fire that would have burned this realm. And you have walked half the world since bearing ashes none asked you to carry. Viserys' shoulders shook. Whether with fury or grief, none could tell. Rhaegar continued, I offer you Dragonstone. Its revenues, its command. Rule it for the crown or hold it as your own. Or take a ship under banners of peace and sail where your dreams guide you. But you will not speak war here. A murmur rippled. Viserys opened his mouth, closed it. You would give me Dragonstone. It is yours by birth, Rhaegar said, and by the mercy of those who died to keep it free. Tears welled but did not fall. Viserys bowed, a ragged, half-broken gesture. I will need advisors, he whispered. Choose any who swear peace, Rhaegar answered, placing a hand on his brother's quaking shoulder. The court breathed again. That evening, as torches blazed along the outer walls in welcome of the returning prince, Lyanna watched from a balcony, arms wrapped around her midsection. Snow flurries twisted above the city like lost ghosts, but melted on battlements. Unable yet to lay claim. Rhaegar joined her, silent. You look as if you expect the snow to speak, she said. It does, he answered, but not in words. She leaned into him, feeling the warmth of his cloak, the steady percussion of a heartbeat slower than her own. Viserys will heal, she whispered, or he will break where neither of us can watch. But we offered the door. Rhaegar pressed his chin to her hair. And the realm watches whether mercy costs blood. Everything costs blood, she said, but sometimes less than fear. Beyond the wall, frost as thin as paper drifted across a landscape. Silent enough to hear ice breathing. Jon Connington pulled his cloak tighter, but cold found the cracks anyway, creeping through seams like invading truth. Beside him, Lord Commander Corgial pointed a gloved hand toward a hollow filled with half-buried stones. That cairn was built last spring, he said, voice muffled by scarves. 20 wildlings frozen to bone in 3 days. We found no wounds. Barristan crouched and brushed away powdery layers, revealing a shard of obsidian lodged between 2 stones. Dragon glass, he murmured. And yet, they died. Arthur scanned the horizon. Perhaps not quickly enough. They made camp behind an ancient weirwood, its red eyes watchful, even in perpetual dusk. Wolves howled in packs of 9 or more. Unusual for winter, the rangers agreed. In the tent, by sputtering lantern, Connington drafted a message for the king. Unnatural stillness. Temperatures dropping beyond memory. Wildlings whisper dead do not stay. Dragonglass found but ineffective. Request supply of alchemist's fire in a lore on first men words. He paused, then added, recommend immediate investigation by a dragon rider if available. He signed, sealed, and handed it to a raven wrangler. The bird vanished into swirling darkness, like a scrap of soul fleeing a body. That night, a sound like crackling ice broke Connington's uneasy sleep. He rolled from his furs and pushed Flap aside. The weirwood's red leaves hung motionless. No wind. Yet the crackling persisted. A rhythm, deliberate. Footsteps. Shapes emerged beyond firelight. Tall, impossibly pale figures, eyes gleaming cold azure. The air tasted of shattering glass. Connington's breath caught, pluming out in dense fog. He reached for his sword just as the first arrow of blue-white crystal hissed past, burying itself in the trunk inches from his ear with a snap that sounded louder than thunder. He shouted, rousing camp. Steel rang, torches flared. Arthur Dane burst from a tent, half-armed, dawn-colored blade aloft. The others, or whatever haunted those legends, advanced with silent unity. Selmy called for dragon-glass daggers. Rangers flung torches. Where flame touched, the creatures recoiled, skin searing to steaming rime. But fire lasted seconds in that biting air. Connington felt his lungs burn as though breathing razors. One other lifted a crystal blade to block Arthur's swing. Dawn met it, white on white. A shockwave burst sparks across snow. The creature's weapon cracked, splintered. Yet shards fused again, knitting like ice reborn. "Retreat!" Corgyle bellowed. Men scrambled, wolves howled nearer. Connington grabbed a bronze horn from Corgilly's belt, blew 3 notes. Night's Watch call for retreat, the blasts freezing mid-air. They fell back toward the wall's shadow, torches flickering like guttering lives. The others did not chase beyond the weirwood canopy. Instead they watched, azure eyes burning through swirling flake. Their silent stare felt heavier than pursuit. At the wall, Connington hurled himself through the gate and slammed the iron grate as if closing a tomb behind him. Inside Castle Black, cooks and stable hands gaped at the sight of Kingsguard bleeding frost. Corgyle ordered fires stoked to roaring and captured ravens loosed with urgent black wings. Connington sank against a soot-streaked pillar, chest heaving. Dawn still glimmered unblemished. But Arthur's hands shook as though memory of that shattering impact reverberated along finger bones. "Winter walks," Barristan whispered. None argued. 5 ravens reached King's Landing, outpacing all others. 1 from Connington, 2 from the Watch, 1 from Benjen Stark, and 1, unexpected, from a listening navigator employed by Tywin Lannister off the Shield Islands. Each told the same tale: pale shapes in mist, cold that burned flesh, and shadows that marched slower than doom yet as certain. Rhaegar read them in a council convened at midnight. Pycelle sputtered about mass hallucination. Varys spoke of old brides' tales. Tywin, present by fresh arrival that evening, weighed each word in silence, eyes like molten brass. When the king finished, he said only, "How many men do you require?" Rhaegar pushed the scrolls aside. "Half those in the south will starve if we send them north now. Yet half those in the north may die if we do not." He looked from face to face. Mace Tyrell, cheeks flushed by candlelight. Balon Greyjoy, newly reconciled by trade promises. Oberyn Martell, lean fingers drumming impatience. Elia, uninvited but fierce. Ned Stark, summoned that morning by emergency raven, travel-stained yet unbowed. These were the pillars of a realm, and cracks spider-webbed among them. "I will go," Rhaegar said. Silence cracked like ice. "The realm will follow a king before it follows a message. I will take the queen's dragons." He glanced to where Aegon and Rhaenys waited near the archway, wide-eyed, "and show the north we stand together." Lyanna stepped forward. "Then I ride too, and leave us motherless?" Aegon squeaked. She knelt before him. "Winter mothers us all, little wolf, but I will stay, for now." Her gaze flicked to Rhaegar. They would speak later. Ned's protest cut through murmured unrest. "Dragonfire may melt ice," he said, "but winter is not a foe any one man can slay. You risk the realm's heart." "The realm's heart beats north of the neck tonight," Rhaegar replied. Tywin's measured voice followed. "And if you fall, chaos will dine on our hearts as carrion." He turned to Elia and Lyanna. "We cannot send both queens behind stone walls praying." Elia straightened, regal. "Then I will serve as regent until the king returns." Mace Tyrell's mustache twitched. Balon scoffed. Rhaegar raised a hand. "If the council consents." He met each lord's gaze. One by one they dipped heads. Even Tywin offered a single nod, respect to the necessity, if not the gamble. Thus was the decision carved in midnight candle smoke. Preparations roused King's Landing before dawn, armor hammered, larders inventoried, ravens dispatched to rally bannermen. The sound of hoofbeats replaced temple bells as knights rehearsed formations in the city's muddy squares. Lyanna found Rhaegar in the Godswood, as pale light climbed over the outer wall. Frost feathered the pool's black surface. He sat on a stone bench, harp untouched beside him. She joined him quietly. For a long moment, they listened to the distant clangor of readiness carried on cold wind. "When I was a girl," she said, "my nurse told tales of snow serpents that swallowed moonlight and spat diamonds across the snows. I used to hide beneath blankets, fearing one would glide through my window." Rhaegar tilted his head. "Does the fear remain? The serpents are real," she whispered. "But I no longer hide." He took her hand and brought it to his lips. "Nor will I." They spoke then of practical matters. Ilias' regency, Maester Luwin's care for the children, the route through the neck bypassing any flooded causeways. When words ran out, they sat instead, side by side, toes numb in thin boots, hearts warm as coals smoldering beneath winter's first snows. At length, Lyanna rose. "Return," she ordered. "I tire of haunting these walls alone." "I will," he promised. She turned, cloak swirling, and did not look back lest he see tears glazing her wolf-gray eyes. On a frosty morning, bright as polished horn, 2,000 riders streamed from the mud gate, banners snapping beneath a sky crystalline and unforgiving. At their head rode King Rhaegar Targaryen, silver helm crested by wings of pale enamel, armor inlaid with rubies lit by dawn's first kiss. To his right, Jaime Lannister, his once shining hair now bound in a practical tail, white cloak over new-forged steel. To the left, Prince Viserys, astonishing, yet true, armored in simpler plate, the dragon sigil upon his surcoat seared fresh, as if to mark a rebirth. Behind came Arthur Dayne, dawn shining like captured sunrise. Barristan Selmy, sworn to guard Aegon, who rode just behind, on a sturdy palfrey. Jon Connington, returned south only to ride north again, grim determination etched on gaunt cheeks, and a host drawn from every corner, Northerners and Reachmen, Dornish and Stormlanders, Valemen ironborn dark with suspicion but The realm itself marched north. Lyanna watched from the tower balcony, Aegon's smaller cloak clutched in her fist. Elia stood beside her, Rhaenys nestled against her hip, tears crystal on the girl's cheeks. The procession wound along the river road until the banners blurred into a living serpent of color. When last standard vanished over a rise, Lyanna exhaled, a cloud that dissolved too quickly, leaving her lungs hollow. Inside, the court shifted like a body missing a limb. Elia convened councils twice daily, her calm voice smoothing disagreements stillborn under her diplomatic gaze. Tywin observed from sidelines, measuring. Mace Tyrell flattered, Balon grumbled. Oberyn laughed decadent scorn at delays. But all deferred when ravens arrived from the north. 3 separate messages in quick succession, each blacker than the last. Castle Black reports multiple ranger parties lost. Aurora persists, sky bright enough to read by at midnight. First confirmed death by White south of the wall. Whispers of fear pulsed through corridors even thick stone could not stifle. Lyanna took nightly walks in the Godswood, pacing red leaves now stiff with rime. She rehearsed speeches to the court, to the small folk, to her children. Yet every time she pictured Rhaegar facing that impossible cold, words fractured. She began sleeping in a small novice's room for its view of the winter sky. Sometimes, in dreams, she saw the aurora too, green serpents coiling like living wildfire above frosted battlements. She woke each dawn chilled, fingers seeking phantom harp strings. One gray noon, as sleet rattled casement panes, Ned's wife Catelyn arrived bearing Robb and little Arya, each bundled in thick wool. "The snow's close moat Kaelin," she explained, blue eyes tight with worry. "Ned begged me south should the white storms breach the wall." Lyanna embraced her sister by marriage, heart aching with gratitude and alarm. The children quickly filled silent corridors with riotous laughter, chasing each other under groaning tapestries. Their presence breathed life into halls grown too brittle with waiting. Yet life also calls to death. 3 days after the Stark arrival, a raven flapped onto the rookery parapet at dusk, feathers rimed with ice so thick the bird collapsed moments after the message was taken. The scroll bore Jon Connington's seal. Broke through snows south of Queenscrown. Host of dead advancing slowly, but unceasing. Kingsguard engaging but cannot hold. Request immediate reinforcements of Dragonfire, Siege kegs, any wildfire stock. King's force hemmed by storms. Progress slowed to 3 leagues per day. Winter distress among small folk along King's Road. Time melting like ice in spring. The small council read this beneath sputtering candles, while wind moaned down chimneys like beasts bereft. Pycelle argued moving wildfire caches north would leave the capital vulnerable. Tywin countered that a capital buried under 10 feet of snow would need neither defense nor food. Mace Tyrell fretted supply lines. Balon offered longships, but only to White Harbor, where he could manage northern trade in the vacuum. Oberyn volunteered Dornish spearmen hardened to desert nights but untested in snow. The chamber devolved into rancor. Lyanna rose, slamming both palms on the hardwood table. Wildfire travels by cart and mule same as grain, she said, voice low but flint hard. We send half our stores tonight, the rest within a moon. Lord Baelish will secure casks from Lys if we fall short. Littlefinger, startled to have been drafted from shadows, inclined his head. Tywin's eyes narrowed at the presumption, but he nodded once. And if the god of winter sets those carts alight on icy roads? He asked. Lyanna's gaze shifted to him, wolf-gray unblinking. Then we will light the night brighter than any dawn and give our children 1 extra day. And 1 day after that, until the spring returns. No one challenged. Elia, lips pressed thin, added, I will write Dragonstone. Viserys must dispatch ships laden with quicklime and siege oil to White Harbor. Even a half-built fleet can outrun snow on water. Balon grunted, grudging respect. Plans unfolded like pressed flowers rehydrated in boiling water, fragile but suddenly vibrant. That night, Lyanna retreated to the Queen's Solar and removed a leather parcel from the hearth's secret niche. The light armor she had worn at Harrenhal, supple dowskin, dyed gray-blue, reins fitted to her lean frame. She laid it across the bed, fingers tracing seams. Echoes of that long-ago dance surrounded her. The wind in the old castle's yard, the hush of spectators, the moment silver hair flashed in torchlight. She remembered the beat of her heart when Rhaegar's voice carried the winter rose before her feet. She remembered believing prophecy just a pretty rhyme until prophecy took shape in a harpist's hands. She folded the armor again. Some battles are fought with steel, others with will. Tomorrow, she would instruct gold cloaks to conscript wagoners, persuade the Alchemists' Guild to part with their jealously hoarded green fire, and calm a city teetering on fear's edge. She owed her children and her king nothing less. But tonight she opened the balcony doors, stepping into sleet that stung like salt. She tilted her face to the iron sky, and in a voice husky from disuse, sang the lullaby her mother once hummed, a northern tune of light returning after the longest night. Sleet softened to snow, swirling like white petals around the tower. Somewhere beyond hearing, perhaps, a dragon lifted head to catch the note. Somewhere beyond sight, a wolf howled answer. The song lingered, trembling between stone and storm, while far away on a frozen field, north of Queenscrown, Rhaegar Targaryen raised Dark Sister aloft, ruby light from his helm casting crimson halos across the snow. Before him stretched an army of shadows, lit only by the blue fire of their eyes, advancing with relentless hush. Behind him, Arthur Dayne planted Dawn in the snow beside a line of hastily stacked wildfire pots, wick ends flickering green. And in that breathless space between a dragon's exhale and winter's bite, the king heard, for just a heartbeat, the faintest echo of a lullaby, carried on winds unfrozen by love. He smiled without knowing why, and stepped forward into the cold. Night deepened until the air itself felt frozen, each breath a thin blade dragged through the lungs. The moon hung behind iron clouds, visible only as a bruised shimmer, its borrowed light fractured across the glinting ranks of ice-clad dead. Snow had ceased falling hours ago, but wind swept powder in fitful flurries, obscuring the living from the whites, until the first clash of iron on frozen bone. Rhaegar crouched at the fore, heart pounding slow and terrible as a war drum. He could hear his own breath rasping in the confines of his helm. Ahead the others waited, silent, unmoving, the blue of their eyes a wound against the night. The whites behind them rustled and shifted, a sound like paper caught in a cold fire, restless and eager for the order to charge. Far to his right, Arthur Dane stood unmoving, the blade dawn gleaming pale as hoarfrost in the torchlight. Barristan was near, shield up, gaze fixed not on the dead but on the dark, listening for the note that would signal the coming avalanche. The order came not as a horn, but as a feeling, a tide in the marrow of every living soldier. The whites began to move, not running, not charging, but advancing in a wave, arms outstretched, the stink of rot carried ahead of them. Some had swords, others only shattered limbs, but each was tireless, relentless, unheeding of pain or fear. Rhaegar could see their faces in the torchlight, small folk who had died in their beds, wildlings frozen in the snows, Northmen lost on patrol. The oldest among them had bones yellowed to ivory, the youngest, faces half-eaten by ravens. He drew Dark Sister, feeling the weight of its history settle over him like a mantle. Every Targaryen king who had held it, every war, every peace. Now it would be used not against living men, but to keep death from swallowing the world. He thought of Lyanna, far south and safe for now, and the children with their bright eyes and easy laughter. He thought of songs and prophecies and all the futures that might be lost if this line broke. Arthur gave the order to light the wildfire. Rhaegar nodded once, the movement small in the confines of his helm, and Connington shouted down the line. Torches were thrust into the pots that had been placed ahead of their palisade, each one packed with the volatile green fire, the guild's last, sent on Lyanna's word. Flames sputtered and spat, then flared to life, casting sickly green light over the snow. The whites faltered at the sudden blaze, their unnatural eyes reflecting emerald. The others stepped forward, unbothered by the flames, their swords raised. They moved with preternatural grace, each step more silent than the last. One of them raised a hand, and the whites surged forward again, some burning, some shrieking, some climbing over the charred remains of their fellows. The wildfire burned hot and hungry, but the snow hissed and spat against it, threatening to drown the green with white. The living braced, shields locked, spears leveled. Rhaegar took his place at the center, knowing that if he fell, the line would break and there would be nothing left to hold the dead at bay. The first clash was chaos. Whites hurled themselves at the shields, clawing and biting, heedless of their own destruction. Men screamed, swords rose and fell, limbs were severed only to be replaced by new horrors. The air filled with the stink of burning flesh, of sweat, of blood, and the scream of the dying. Through it all, Rhaegar fought as he had never fought before. Every movement a desperate prayer, every parry and thrust a plea for Dawn. Arthur was beside him, Dawn a blur in the flickering light. Where the blade met the other's crystal swords, sparks burst, blue against white, cold against cold. Barristan shouted orders, his voice cutting through the din, keeping men from breaking, from fleeing. Connington was there too, face set, eyes wide and wild, sword work brutal and effective. They were the heart of the line, the center around which the living rallied, the place where hope refused to die. The whites pressed closer, the wildfire's heat beginning to fade as the snow encroached. Rhaegar risked a glance down the line, saw men falling, saw the dead rising behind their lines. He saw Jaime Lannister, sword gleaming, fighting back to back with Sir Loras Prestley. He saw Jon Snow, Nan's bastard, though never called so in Rhaegar's heart, swinging a dragonglass axe, every stroke a defiance of fate. The boy had slipped out of Winterfell with Benjen, and a handful of Night's Watch Rangers to join the fight. Now he stood at the front, face set, eyes bright. The others closed in, their blades meeting steel with a sound like the shattering of ice. Rhaegar found himself face to face with one, its features impossibly old, as if the winter itself had chosen a human form. The creature raised its sword, and Rhaegar met it with Dark Sister. The blade struck with a force that drove him to one knee, but he refused to fall. He saw his own breath, steaming in the night, felt the heat of his blood, the ache in his arms. He pressed forward, driving the creature back step by step, the clash of their blades echoing over the field. Each time the other's sword met Dark Sister, frost spread up the Valyrian steel, only to melt away in the heat of Rhaegar's grip. The fight became all there was, no court, no crown, only survival. Elsewhere, the wildfire gave out. The line began to buckle. Connington shouted for retreat to the next palisade, but Rhaegar knew they could not give ground, not with the others so close. He cut the creature's sword in half with a desperate swing, then drove the point of Dark Sister through its chest. The other shattered, fragments spinning away into the dark. The wights near it collapsed, their necromantic bond severed. Arthur's voice rang out, "Rally on the king! Drive them back!" Men surged forward, spears and axes flashing. Rhaegar felt a surge of hope. This, then, was the moment on which the world turned. But the others regrouped. Their leader, taller than the rest, armored in ice that glimmered with strange runes, stepped into the gap. He raised his sword, and the storm itself seemed to howl in answer. Snow whirled, visibility vanished, and the lines dissolved in chaos. Rhaegar staggered, nearly blinded by wind and ice. He saw men lost, some taken by the storm, some slain by the dead. He found Barristan by chance, bleeding from a wound to his temple, but still standing. Together, they carved a path back to the palisade, gathering survivors as they went. Jon appeared at their side, eyes wide, face streaked with blood and melting snow. "They're everywhere," he gasped. "We have to fall back, or we'll be cut off." "Arthur!" Rhaegar shouted into the dark. "Connington!" Only the wind replied. He could not abandon them. He could not abandon anyone. But Jon's hand was at his arm, Barristan's voice in his ear. "We must go, Your Grace. The dead will take us all if we stay." He hesitated only a moment, then signaled retreat. Together they fell back through the storm, torches held high, calling to the scattered bands of men. When the storm passed, the world was changed. Half their number lost. Some dead, some fled, some unaccounted for. Arthur Dayne rejoined them at dawn, bloodied but alive, dragging Connington with him. The others had vanished with the night. But their threat remained, heavier than ever. Rhaegar stood at the edge of the field, looking over the carnage, the broken shields, the scattered limbs. The sun, pale and weak, rose over a world made new by suffering. He knew then that this was only the beginning. The retreat was long, the cold unyielding. Every league south, the dead followed, their numbers swollen by those who had fallen. Messengers were sent to Castle Black and beyond, to White Harbor, to Winterfell, to King's Landing. Everywhere, the news was the same. The dead marched, unstoppable, inexorable. At Winterfell, Lyanna felt the chill before the first raven arrived. She had not slept, and now she moved through the halls in a daze, ordering provisions, giving comfort where she could. The children clung to her, Aegon quiet and fierce, Rhaenys dreaming of dragons, Jaehaerys not yet old enough to understand, but frightened by the tension in every adult he saw. Ilya took charge of the council. Tywin Lannister argued for retreat, for fortifying the south. Mace Tyrell wanted to recall all armies to the Reach. Balon Greyjoy, eyeing chaos, pushed for more autonomy and coastal raids. Oberyn was everywhere, sending messengers, rallying volunteers, his usual mockery replaced by grim resolve. But it was Lyanna who commanded their respect. She rode north to White Harbor herself, meeting with Lord Manderley, ensuring that every available ship would carry refugees to safety. She oversaw the distribution of wildfire, against every councillor's protests. She insisted that every castle from the Neck northward have enough to burn every approach if needed. She sent ravens to the Eyrie, to Sunspear, to even distant Oldtown, urging them to send supplies, men, and wisdom. She slept little, ate less, and every night she sang to her children, the same lullaby her mother had sung, a promise that winter could not last forever. North of the Neck, the king's army regrouped. Rhaegar paced the battered remnants of his camp, listening to the reports. Numbers dwindling, food scarce, spirits lower each day. Yet each man who saw him, bloodied, exhausted, determined, found new courage. They were fighting for the living now, not for banners or crowns. One night, as the aurora flickered green across the sky, a lone rider came from the east. It was Benjen Stark, face haggard, beard crusted with frost. He carried news of a massacre at Hardhome. Thousands dead, then risen, marching south in silence. "There is no stopping them, Your Grace," he said. "Not here. Not now. All we can do is slow them and hope." "Hope for what?" Rhaegar asked, voice low. Benjen shrugged. "For a miracle. For spring. For the fire to last one more night." Rhaegar felt the weight of it then. The burden of every life in Westeros, the promise of every future yet unclaimed. He closed his eyes and saw Lyanna's face, the children, the Red Keep blazing in sunset light. He turned to Arthur. "Send word to King's Landing. Tell them to prepare every defense. If the wall falls, the dead will come. And when they do, the living must stand together, or perish alone." Arthur nodded, then paused. "There is another way, Rhaegar. Bran Stark, the crippled boy, he dreams of things he cannot know. He says the wall is more than stone, that there is magic in the old places." Rhaegar considered this, remembering the prophecies, the old tales. "Then we must find him. And if he can help. If he cannot," Arthur asked, "then we hold the line as long as we can." The king's host moved south, each day buying a few more hours, a few more lives. At every village they passed, refugees joined them, farmers and fishermen, old men and children, all clinging to hope. At every crossing they left behind a garrison, a promise, and, where the others pressed hardest, a cache of wildfire. At last they reached Winterfell. The castle stood braced for siege, walls lined with archers, fires burning day and night. Lyanna met them at the gate, face pale but eyes bright. She threw her arms around Rhaegar, holding him as if she would never let go. Aegon ran to him, followed by Rhaenys and Jaehaerys. For a moment all was silent. The world paused, the past and future suspended. But the dead marched, and the time for peace was gone. Within Winterfell's great hall, the lords of the realm gathered. Those who had survived, those who had not fled south. Ned Stark stood at Rhaegar's right hand, his face carved in granite. Catelyn, Cersei, Margaery, Sansa, Arya, and the rest gathered with the children, every eye drawn to the king. "We must decide," Rhaegar said, "whether to stand here or retreat farther south. The wall cannot hold much longer. If we fall, there will be nothing left to defend. If we stand, we may all die. But if we flee, we may lose even more." The silence was long and heavy. It was Lyanna who broke it. "We stand," she said. "Here now. For our children, for the world we hope to see." Others murmured agreement. Ned placed a hand on Rhaegar's shoulder. "Winterfell has never fallen. It will not fall now." Rhaegar nodded. "Then we make our stand. Light every fire, ready every weapon. The living will not yield." "Nani?" The siege began at dawn. The dead came in waves, endless and tireless. Wildfire burned in the ditches. Archers loosed arrows until their fingers bled, every sword and axe red with use. Atop the walls, Rhaegar fought beside Arthur and Barristan, with Jaime, Jon, and the rest. A last alliance of men and women, united not by oaths, but by survival. The others circled the walls, sending their whites against the gates, seeking every weakness. Magic pulsed in the old stones, resisting the dead, but the pressure never ceased. The nights were endless, the days a blur of blood and snow. And still, the living endured. In the crypts below, Bran Stark sat in a circle of carved stone, eyes rolled back, hands spread. Magic whispered through the roots of the heart tree, pulsing through the old god's veins. Beside him, Lyanna and Sansa tended the wounded, their courage a beacon in the dark. Outside, Rhaegar felt the magic, the promise of spring in every heartbeat. He saw the others hesitate, saw their leader falter as Bran's power grew. And then, one night, As the aurora blazed brightest, Bran's voice rang through the castle, a sound both child and old man, echoing in every soul. "It ends," he said, "with fire and blood, with hope, with love." The others recoiled. The dead began to fall, their animating force flickering like candles in the wind. Rhaegar rallied the living for one last charge, every man and woman roaring as they surged from the gates. Dawn came at last, clear, bright, golden. The dead had been pushed back, shattered, broken. The others fled into the shadows, their power broken by the old magic, by the fire, by the will of the living. Winterfell stood, battered but unbowed. Rhaegar climbed the battlements and looked out over the fields, where the snow was stained red and green, but life had triumphed. He turned to Lyanna, pulled her close, and whispered, "It is done." She smiled, tears streaming down her face. "Now, let us build the world we dreamed of." And so, beneath the light of a new sun, the living began again. K.N. Morning rose clear and cold over Winterfell, a sun sharp enough to make even blood-stained snow dazzle. The sky arched, hard and blue, as if washed clean by the wind that had howled for days, scattering the remnants of the dead, scouring the battlefields, until nothing moved but crows and the living who cleaned after victory. Inside the castle, the stones themselves felt lighter. The silence that once had pressed against every wall was broken at last by the ordinary sounds of life returning. A baby's thin cry, the ring of hammers as smiths mended arms and armor, the crackle of fires in every hearth. Rhaegar stood at the highest point of Winterfell, wrapped in a heavy cloak. Below, in the yard, men and women dragged the last of the bodies to pyres, piling up burned and shattered bones. He watched a long while, thinking of the price that had been paid for one sunrise. He could still see the dead in every shadow, the icy eyes of the others burning into his dreams. He pressed a hand to his brow, feeling the old ache that came before prophecy, before music, before all the legends that had driven him to this place. Yet, as the cold air stung his cheeks, he was only a man, alive in a world that had not been devoured by darkness. Footsteps echoed on the stair. Ned Stark appeared at his side, wrapped in black and gray, hair matted by sleepless nights. "They're burning the last of them," Ned said, voice rough. "And then the gods would for a reckoning. We'll need to speak to the lords. Some are already restless for the road home." "Nee." Rhaegar nodded, eyes fixed on the smoke that curled up from the pyres. "It will be a long reckoning, Lord Stark. Too many debts, too much blood." He let the silence stretch, broken only by the distant cry of a wolf somewhere in the woods. Will the North forgive a Southern king, after all this? Ned considered. The North forgives what endures. It's the ones who run that we remember as cowards. He hesitated, then placed a heavy hand on Rhaegar's shoulder. "You did not run. None of us did." Rhaegar managed a tight smile. "Let us hope that memory survives when the snow melts, and that my brother finds as much forgiveness. The dragon is not so easy to love, even now." They stood together for a while, not speaking, sharing the stillness that was the only reward the gods gave survivors. Later, in the great hall, the banners of a dozen houses hung limp from their poles, smoke blackened and torn but still standing. The lords gathered in uneasy clusters, some wrapped in silks faded by hardship, others in furs stained with blood and mud. Rhaegar entered, flanked by Ned and Lyanna, with Arthur Dayne and Barristan Selmy just behind. He felt the weight of every gaze, some resentful, some pleading, a few proud. "My lords," he began, voice carrying, "we have survived the end of the world. You have bled for your homes and kin, stood side by side against death. There is no song for this day, only the truth that each of you must carry to your halls." Olenna Tyrell, her eyes shrewd despite the lines of age, was the first to speak. "Your Grace, it's well to speak of unity now, but winter is not done. The granaries of the Reach are spent, the rivers run thin, and every house counts its dead. The Iron Throne must give more than words." "Maesha." Rhaegar nodded. "You will have what you need, Lady Olenna. My brother rules Dragonstone now, and the grain ships will sail first for Old Town and the Arbor. Every lord shall receive a share according to their need. The Riverlands will have timber and smiths, the North stonemasons for the wall. There will all be no favorites, only survivors." Lord Glover grumbled. "The North needs more than stone. We lost half our herds. What good is a king who rules over bones and ice?" Then Absel. It was Lyanna who answered, standing tall, voice ringing. "You have more than bones, Lord Glover. You have the will to see spring. The king cannot summon cattle from the earth, but he can ensure no southerner turns you out or taxes you until you are strong again." Her words struck home, and the murmurs faded. Balon Greyjoy, who had survived with wounds and a battered pride, demanded, "And what of the Ironborn, your grace? My ships bled for this realm, yet we are still mistrusted, still kept from fair harbors. Are we lords or dogs?" They. Rhaegar met Balon's eye without blinking. "The Ironborn are of Westeros. The realm is one, now and hereafter. If you keep the peace, you will have your ports and your gold. But if you raid, you will find no mercy. Not from me, and not from the North. The choice is yours, Balon. The choice is for all of us now." A silence settled, tense but not hostile. Then, from the far end of the hall, Mace Tyrell's son Garland, young and unblooded but upright and calm, called out, "And what of the old enmities, your grace? The Lannisters, the Tyrells, the Starks. Must we pretend we were never at war?" "Menem praise all." Rhaegar's voice was low but steady. "We do not forget. We choose what we become. If any man clings to the feuds of the past, he gives the dead a foothold in the world of the living. I ask each lord to speak not for vengeance, but for what he will build when spring comes." One by one, the lords gave grudging assent, some with enthusiasm, some with resignation. Sansa Stark, wise beyond her years, watched from the shadows, her little brother Bran beside her. Arya was gone from her seat, already halfway to the kitchens to scrounge for news and food, her feet quick and silent. In the weeks that followed, Winterfell became the heart of a battered realm. Refugees flooded in from villages to the south and east, clutching what little they had saved: tools, songs, stories. Bran spent his days in the Godswood, half in dream, half in the world, speaking to the roots and the birds and the ravens that came now in droves, bearing news from every quarter. One day, as Rhaegar sat with Jon Connington and Arthur Dayne in the council chamber, a raven arrived from the wall, wings rimed with frost. The note was brief: 3 rangers lost beyond the Shadow Tower, no sign of the dead, only silence. Rhaegar frowned, passing the message to Arthur. "The dead are gone, but something lingers." Arthur nodded. "Magic runs deep in those stones. The old powers sleep, but they are not dead. We will watch, but the wall stands for now." Rhaegar thought of the prophecies again. Azor Ahai, the prince that was promised, the song of ice and fire. He had believed, once, that it was him. Now, with the others broken, and the realm on the edge of ruin, he wondered if prophecy was ever more than a mirror for the hopes and fears of men. Lyanna ruled as much by word as by example, walking the walls each morning, speaking to the sentries, kneeling to comfort the frightened. She taught the children to work together, to mend, to hope. Aegon, tall for his age, already trained at swordplay with Arya, who laughed at his seriousness. Rhaenys danced in the snow, her laughter ringing out like silver bells. Jaehaerys learned to read from Bran, though the boy's mind wandered down strange paths, always chasing some invisible thread in the world. Elia remained at Lyanna's side, her wisdom and patience a balm for the wounded. Her daughter Rhaenys grew close to Sansa and the girls of the North, learning the tales and crafts of a people she had never known before. The southern lords, at first wary, saw their children growing strong in the cold, and gradually the bitterness faded. Even Viserys, once the bitter exile, seemed changed. He wrote long letters to the lords of the Narrow Sea, inviting trade and peace, his tone proud but no longer petulant. He came once to Winterfell, standing awkward and pale in the hall, but left with a new sense of purpose. On Dragonstone, he founded a small council of his own, determined to prove himself worthy of the trust given him. As spring approached, Signs of new life crept through the snowdrifts. Shoots of green forced their way between paving stones. The air no longer bit so fiercely at dawn, and birds returned in flocks, their songs echoing through the halls. Work crews repaired bridges and roads, with knights and small folk laboring side by side. Tensions flared and cooled as everyone learned to live in the world the war had left them. Rhaegar met often with the council, drafting edicts and decrees for the rebuilding. He sent for healers from Old Town, for engineers from Pentos, for stonemasons from the free cities. In time, new towns grew along the King's Road, and the battered castles of the north welcomed friends, not foes. There were challenges, plagues, famine, bandits who would not bow to any law. Rhaegar rode himself to put down the worst of these, flanked by Arthur Dayne and Barristan. He returned each time exhausted, yet relieved to find Lyanna waiting, the children clustered at her feet, the fire always burning. One night, as they sat together in the solar, Lyanna read aloud letters from across the realm, thanks from Bear Island for a shipment of salt, a request from the Manderleys for more seed grain, a poem from Dorne. Rhaegar leaned back, letting her voice wash over him, the children drowsing in the warmth. "Do you regret it?" Lyanna asked, after the children had gone. He shook his head. "No, I regret only that it took so much loss to teach us what matters." He reached for her hand. "You taught me that. You and the children and the North." She smiled, fierce and bright. "Then let's make sure the world never forgets." Far to the east on Dragonstone, Viserys stood on the battlements, gazing across the churning sea. He dreamed sometimes of dragons, of fire and conquest. But more often, he dreamed of ships laden with grain, of fair trade, of peace that would not shatter at the first sign of weakness. He wrote to Rhaegar every fortnight, their letters less formal, more open, until at last the brothers spoke as kin, not rivals. Rhaegar encouraged him, sending wise men and women to advise, rewarding his efforts with praise that was hard-won but honest. In time, Dragonstone became a haven, not a fortress, a place for those who had no other home. The years passed. The world healed. The wall stood, the watch wary but not desperate. Children born after the war knew nothing of the dead, save as stories told on winter nights. Rhaegar and Lyanna's children grew strong, Aegon a squire, Rhaenys learning to ride, Jaehaerys quick with a bow. Bran's visions faded as he grew, yet the old powers never quite left him. Arya vanished for a time, wandering the wilds, but returned at last, carrying new tales and new wisdom. The old lords faded, replaced by sons and daughters who remembered what it was to fight together. The Ironborn sent ships of fish and lumber, not raiders. The Reach grew fields of golden grain. Dorne sent wine, the Vale its falcons, the Westerlands their gold for bridges and books, not armies. Rhaegar's harp gathered dust more often than not, but sometimes, on summer evenings, he would play for Lyanna and the children, the notes drifting over the yard, mingling with the scents of honeysuckle and pine. No longer did he dream of prophecy, of destiny. Now he dreamed of peace. One night, as the first fireflies flickered in the dusk, Rhaegar climbed the walls of Winterfell, Lyanna at his side. The sky stretched, violet and endless, and the stars wheeled overhead. "Are you happy?" Lyanna asked softly, her hand warm in his. He turned to her, smiling. "For the first time, I think I am." She leaned against him, her laughter quiet as falling snow. "Then we have done enough." They stood together as the wind carried the promise of summer through the north, a promise bought with blood, and courage, and the will to live. Below them, the world turned, and the story of Westeros began again. Spring, when it finally arrived, was slow and reluctant. The snow retreated first from the fields east of Winterfell, peeling back in ragged lines, bearing the pale stubble of last autumn's harvest, and the black scars where fire had passed. Days grew longer by heartbeats. The air softened, still carrying the memory of frost, but the sun warmed the stones and set rivulets trickling down the walls. The courtyards filled with children's laughter, even as the adults moved about their work with care, a world made cautious by what it had survived. Rhaegar's beard grew thick and flecked with silver that spring, his hair caught more by the wind as he rode the perimeter of Winterfell's holdings with Ned. They took counsel in the open air, wrapped in cloaks, while the wolves of House Stark ranged the woods and the northern banners stood in peace. At every outlying hamlet they found life returning. Thatched roofs repaired, fields marked with hopeful stakes, goats calving in the morning chill, a child's bright kite flaring over a stream swollen with meltwater. When they halted in the evening, they spoke of the wall and the wild country beyond, of ships and ravens and the ache of old wounds. "I thought peace would be easier," Rhaegar admitted, watching a woman drive a plow across her field, while 2 children ran behind. The old tales made it sound like a song. "You slay the beast, the harvest comes, all is well." Ned grunted, smile crooked. "The tales leave out the years after. Song ends when the last note fades. Living is what comes after the song." Rhaegar nodded, thinking of prophecy and the endless pull of what should be, and realized that for the first time since he'd claimed his father's throne, he could let the future rest. The realm was not yet healed, but it was healing, which was more than he had dared hope when the dead first came south. They returned to Winterfell as the dusk painted the sky in blue and rose, the gates open, the banners streaming limp and faded. Lyanna waited at the steps, her hair unbound, eyes bright in the lantern light. Rhaegar dismounted, shaking off the road's weariness, and took her hand. She pressed her palm against his, the secret pressure that always told him, no matter what crown he wore or what ghosts prowled the halls, that he was home. Inside the great hall, preparations were underway for a feast, the like of which Winterfell had not seen in years. The small folk of the surrounding lands, farmers and herders, tradesmen and their families, gathered at long trestle tables. There was meat again, and root vegetables roasted in honey, and dark bread still steaming from the ovens. The wine was sour and thin, but no one complained. Laughter crackled above the music. A fiddler from White Harbor, a singer from the Neck, their tunes weaving in and out with the gossip and shouts. Lyanna presided over it all like a wolf at ease in her den, her laughter the brightest music of the evening. Elia sat beside her, radiant in a new dress sent from Sunspear, her daughter Rhaenys spinning tales for a circle of children. Irea darted between the tables, hair wild, eyes dancing, quick with a jest or a stolen apple. Sansa watched over her siblings, more poised with every passing season, though her eyes lingered on the northern banners and the snow melting at the eaves. Jon Snow sat near the hearth with Benjen, both deep in conversation with a handful of Night's Watchmen. Bran sat close to the fire, legs folded, a black and white direwolf at his side, telling Hodor about a dream of green fields and flying birds. Aegon and Jaehaerys were everywhere, their laughter following them from the kitchens to the stables and back again. Rhaegar moved among them, his presence a steady warmth, his words gentle. He listened more than he spoke, nodding encouragement to the smiths, to the old men with stories of the long winter, to the children daring each other to touch the dragon's ruby clasp on his cloak. When the feasting was at its height, he lifted his cup, waited for silence, and said only, "To the living, may we never forget how dearly we bought this night." The hall erupted in cheers, and for a moment even those who had suffered most found cause to smile. The days that followed brought fresh challenges. With peace came restlessness, the sense that debts were still unpaid, that some justice waited over the next ridge. Balon Greyjoy's men grumbled in the alehouses of White Harbor, itching for the sea, while the Tyrells plotted ways to regain lost influence in the Reach. The Riverlands saw old grudges flare, as villages argued over broken boundaries and vanished heirs. In council, Rhaegar listened to each grievance. He relied on Lyanna's sense of justice, Aelia's calm, Ned's blunt honesty, and even Jaime Lannister's wry observations. The realm did not always thank him for it. Twice a month, disputes broke out at the council table. Over tithes, patrols, even over the grain wagons sent north from Dragonstone. But Rhaegar held to his course. No favor, no vengeance, only the steady work of rebuilding. He traveled often, never staying at Winterfell more than a fortnight. In the Reach, he met with Mace Tyrell in the shade of a blooming apple orchard, discussing roads and trade, with Lady Olenna cutting through every polite lie with a sharp look. At River Run, Edmure Tully greeted him with open arms, while his wife, Roslyn, showed Rhaegar the first of their newborn children, hair as red as autumn leaves. At the Eyrie, little Lord Robert was growing into his name at last, coached by Maester Coleman, and watched over by his mother, Lysa, who had thawed only enough to host the king for a single night before retreating to her tower. In Old Town, the maesters offered what knowledge they could, poring over old maps and scrolls, trying to decipher the remnants of magic that still lingered north of the wall. Dragonstone became a beacon of hope, not threat. Viserys, finding purpose at last, oversaw shipwrights and foreign traders with a stern, measured hand. He sent envoys to the free cities, and welcomed Volantene and Braavosi merchants alike, flooding the narrow sea with new goods and ideas. Rhaegar's letters to his brother grew warmer. Sometimes he even asked advice. One dawn, as a storm faded and birds returned to the trees, Rhaegar climbed the broken outer wall of Winterfell and found Jon Snow already there, wrapped in a heavy cloak, watching the sun climb over the edge of the world. "Couldn't sleep?" Rhaegar asked, joining him. Jon shook his head. "I see them sometimes. The dead, I mean. In dreams. The wall still calls to me. The Night's Watch. It needs men like you," Rhaegar said, studying the boy's profile, the stubborn chin and the quiet resolve in his eyes. Jon didn't answer for a long time. "You think they'll come again? The others?" Rhaegar hesitated. "The world is full of cycles. Old magics fade, then rise again. But the wall stands, and now we have knowledge, and the promise of men like you, and Bran, and every child born after the long night." He placed a hand on Jon's shoulder. "We are prepared now. That's all the world can ask of us." Jon managed a small smile. "I suppose you're right. Sometimes I wish I were a child again, when all I worried about was old Nan's stories and Arya's pranks." "Nandi Talarer." Rhaegar smiled. "Even kings wish that. Sometimes. Especially kings." They stood in companionable silence as the sun gilded the treetops, then went down to breakfast together. Word spread slowly of the realm's recovery. In Dorne, Oberyn Martell rode north with 200 spearmen, a gesture of loyalty that was part theater, part genuine concern. The Ironborn, for a time, turned their ships to fishing and trade. In the Reach, Lady Olenna's sharp management brought 3 bumper harvests in a row, enough to feed the north and fill Old Town's granaries. At the Wall, Benjen Stark led the Night's Watch with new purpose, welcoming wildlings who sought peace, brokering fragile treaties that held for seasons at a time. The wildlings sent tribute, furs, bone tools, even the occasional giant's tooth. Bran, now walking more often than not with a carved staff, journeyed to the Wall with Arya, both of them changed by the wild places, and met with maesters, old gods, and the new Order of the Watch. Stories of strange things in the far north trickled down. Trees that walked, ghostly stags, visions in the aurora. But none dared speak the word others aloud. Rhaegar and Lyanna's children grew tall. Aegon took easily to the sword, his charm a blend of wolf and dragon, while Rhaenys showed a knack for healing that Elia nurtured with pride. Jaehaerys, youngest and boldest, learned to ride before he could read, and spent more time in the stables than in any hall. Their laughter brought hope wherever they went. Years passed, as they do in the stories men tell when the fires burn low. Rhaegar grew slower, his hair streaked with gray, but his voice lost none of its music, nor his rule its fairness. He became the king remembered for peace, for the roads and towers rebuilt, the fields sown and reaped, the small folk lifted from hunger. His reign was measured in seasons, in births and marriages, in the soft marvel that comes when war finally ceases to be the heart of every tale. Lyanna, her beauty undiminished, ruled at his side, a queen as fierce in council as in battle, beloved by North and South. Together they raised their children to honor both wolf and dragon, to know kindness as well as strength, to believe that even the coldest winter ends. There were losses. Arthur Dane died defending a bridge from bandits in the Riverlands, his death mourned from Doran to the Wall. Barristan Selmy retired to the White Sword Tower, his memory honored in song. Ned Stark, hair gone to snow, returned to Winterfell for good, content to live out his years as lord and father. Catelyn ruled the household with gentle strength. Sansa wed a lord of the Vale. Arya journeyed east and west and finally came home. Bran wrote down the dreams he remembered, and Jon Snow, at last, became Lord Commander, leading the Night's Watch into a new age. On the last night of Rhaegar's life, the king stood atop the wall at Winterfell, listening to Lyanna sing. The children were grown and gone, the realm quiet. He watched the stars wheel overhead, a harp cradled in his arms, the chords drifting down through the spring night. He thought of prophecy and madness, of the Mad King and the flames, of love and sacrifice, and knew it had all led to this, a world that endured, where even winter ended. He played one last song as Lyanna joined him, their hands twined, the wolf and the dragon at peace. And below, in the quiet halls and fields of Winterfell, the world turned again, ready for a new story to begin. Kai. The great peace did not arrive as a single dawn, but as a season, a succession of soft, cumulative days, each one indistinct but collectively transformative. The wounds of the realm, burned fields, broken towers, hearts scarred by betrayal and loss, healed with an unhurried patience no king or council could command. Children born after the long night took their first steps in a world that seemed both raw and impossibly promising, their laughter drifting through open windows with the pollen-laden spring wind. Rhaegar watched this renewal from Winterfell's towers, which by now were crowned with green rather than frost. Moss crept up from the godswood, a deep velvet along the old stones. He found pleasure in small things, fresh bread cooling in the kitchens, the clatter of dice in the barracks, the sight of Jon Snow and his siblings, racing their deerwolves at the edge of the greenwood, shadows long in the late sun. There were mornings he spent alone with his harp beneath the heart tree, the notes plucked into the breeze like seeds scattered for new growth. Sometimes Lyanna joined him, her bare feet brushing grass, her voice rough with sleep or laughter as she watched their children tumble in the soft moss. The court, that had once seemed a battlefield of tempers and interests, became something more fluid and less brittle. Lords lingered at Winterfell, no longer in fear of missed opportunity, but eager to add their advice, their wit, their stories to the slow process of renewal. Lady Olenna, long past her prime but sharp as new steel, coordinated trade and managed supplies with a precision none dared challenge. Mace Tyrell rode north every summer, bringing barrels of apples and gossip in equal measure. Edmure Tully visited each year at Thaw, his family a blur of ruddy-haired children filling the pools with splashing and shrieks. The Riverlands rebuilt with a vigor Rhaegar found humbling. Grain wagons rolled in steady lines from the Reach to the north, and back again, crossing new bridges of stone and wood. Merchants from the free cities set up stalls in the rebuilt markets, their tongues a chorus of hope and ambition. On the first day of every month, the tolling of the great bell summoned townsfolk to the square, where Lyanna and Sansa heard their grievances. Fewer and fewer were about hunger or loss. More and more were about small trespasses, a fence torn down by goats, a roof needing thatch. The arguments, once edged with desperation, turned to stubbornness and pride. Yet even in peace, the legacy of fire and ice was never fully erased. The dead were honored each year with a day of silence. Rhaegar led a simple procession through the godswood, Lyanna beside him, heads bowed. The children followed, torches guttering in the early spring wind, their faces grave and intent. Bran, always more aware of the unseen than his kin, laid a hand on the weirwood and whispered a litany in the old tongue that none but the gods understood. The southern courts followed suit, holding their own rites of remembrance. In Old Town the bells pealed at dusk, echoing over the honeycomb of temples and towers. In the Reach, great fields were set alight with floating lanterns, the flames reflected in the rivers. Dorne celebrated by planting lemon trees along the roadsides, each sapling named for a soul lost in the wars. In the Iron Islands, The drowned men led prayers for the dead and living alike, their voices sonorous against the sea. In King's Landing, Elia Martell presided as regent while Rhaegar remained in the north, her rule marked by a calm, patient pragmatism that slowly erased the last stains of the Mad King's reign. She reopened the orphanages, rebuilt the old sept, and persuaded the guilds to create new apprenticeships for the city's youth. The city's mood softened as bread became more plentiful, water cleaner, justice more even-handed. Viserys on Dragonstone, no longer the beggar king of old songs, proved himself a tireless reformer. He forged alliances with the free cities, imported new shipwrights and glassmakers, and transformed the old fortress into a hub for trade and learning. His marriage to a merchant princess from Pentos was a shock to some, but the union proved fruitful. Their children grew up trilingual and curious, playing on the beaches as ships from every corner of the world dropped anchor in the shadow of the great dragon statues. Aegon, Rhaenys, and Jaehaerys came of age in the years that followed. Each bore the weight of legacy differently. Aegon grew into a prince of impossible grace, polite, charismatic, a natural leader. His squirehood in the Vale became legend after he negotiated peace between two warring clans by hosting a tournament where no weapon sharper than a spoon was allowed. Rhaenys, ever the boldest, took after her mother and her aunt Elia, combining the Stark stubbornness with the Martell cunning. She studied at Oldtown for a season, became a knight in all but name, then rode south to Sunspear, where she spent long months learning the ways of water gardens and sand stealth. Jaehaerys, youngest and most bookish, apprenticed himself to the maesters. But his letters home were filled with observations not of facts, but of people. He wrote of the friendships and rivalries among novices, the quiet pain of orphans sent to train, the joy in discovering a new constellation. He invented new games for the children of the Citadel, and when he returned to court, brought those games with him, teaching high and lowborn alike. Jon Snow, meanwhile, flourished as Lord Commander. He welcomed the wildlings across the wall, building new villages, negotiating with the giants, setting the first stones for a hall where the old gods and the Seven might be worshipped side by side. Arya vanished for a time, only to return one autumn with a band of spearwives and a white direwolf twice the size of any hound. Bran spent years wandering in dreams, learning the slow patience of roots and rivers, the subtle music of the world's turning. Ned Stark grew old at Winterfell, the gray in his beard now more prominent than the brown. He delighted in the company of his grandchildren, teaching them the names of every tree, every star, every hidden spring in the forest. Catelyn ran the household, her voice a constant in the chaos of growing children and visiting lords. Sansa's own brood, with their dark hair and blue eyes, grew up alongside their cousins, sharing tutors, nurses, and adventures among the ancient stones. Arya never wed, but remained the family's wild heart, her tales growing taller each year. Rhaegar found himself content to play the role of peacemaker and patriarch. He met often with Lyanna and Ned, the three of them walking the ramparts at dusk, sharing memories and advice. The old wounds between Stark and Targaryen became scars, then faded altogether, remembered only in songs sung softly by the fireside. As the children matured, court life shifted. New faces arrived, diplomats from the Summer Isles, merchants from Korth, warriors from the Stepstones seeking to learn northern swordplay. The court's language grew more varied, its customs more flexible. On midsummer nights, the great hall filled with the music of a dozen lands. Rhaegar's harp was joined by Dornish flutes, Braavosi horns, even the wild drums of Skagos. Lyanna presided over these feasts with a regal ease, her beauty deepened by time, her laughter infectious. Not all was idyllic, of course. Famine threatened after a late frost one year, but the alliances forged in hardship held. The Reach sent grain, the Riverlands organized wagons, and Dorne dispatched wines to keep the northern spirits high. There were bandit raids on the King's Road, swiftly dealt with by garrisons from the Westerlands and North alike. When a fire destroyed half of White Harbor's docks, Viserys sent ships loaded with timber and skilled workers. There were always tensions. The Tyrells and Lannisters never lost their taste for intrigue. though their plots now unfolded in the courts of love and commerce, rather than on the battlefield. The Ironborn tested the king's resolve with small raids on Pentos, but Balin, aged and diminished, was quick to recall his men when faced with the unified threat of dragon and wolf. Rumors of trouble in the east persisted, Dothraki hordes restive, a new warlord gathering ships in the Basilisk Isles, even talk of a sorcerer in Yeti raising an army of shadows. But, for now, the realm endured. It was enough. One crisp autumn, Rhaegar journeyed to King's Landing for the first Grand Council in years. The city greeted him with a riot of color. Banners snapping in the wind, roses flung from windows, crowds cheering in the square. He entered through the Gate of the Gods, Lyanna at his side, their children following on proud horses. Elia met them at the steps of the Red Keep, her face wreathed in smiles, her counselors bowing low. The council that followed was less a meeting of rivals than a reunion of kin. Edmure Tully, white-haired now but quick to jest, proposed a new canal-linking river run to the Blackwater Rush. Garland Tyrell argued for a festival of renewal to be held in every major city, with games, races, and feasting for rich and poor alike. Tyrion Lannister, present as the Lord of Casterly Rock, silver-haired and shrewd, suggested a fund for orphaned children to be managed jointly by the Crown and the Faith. Rhaegar listened, considered, and gave each idea its due. He spoke little, but when he did, his words were measured, often ending argument rather than inflaming it. In private, he conferred with Lyanna and Elia, weighing each decision not only for its merit, but for the precedent it would set for future generations. At the festival's end, he joined Lyanna in the Godswood. They knelt beneath the heart tree, the red leaves whispering above them. "It is a good world," he said, "and I am glad to have lived to see it." Lyanna's hand found his. "We built it together, all of us." He smiled. "May it outlast our children's children." The following spring, a comet streaked the sky. Brighter than any seen in living memory, its tail a fiery banner that set hearts to speculation. Some said it was an omen of a new age, others a sign that the gods had not forgotten the world. Rhaegar watched its passage with awe and humility, his mind wandering to prophecies left unfulfilled, to songs unfinished. He stood one evening on the walls, Lyanna beside him, the castle below alive with torches and laughter. They spoke of the past, of the Mad King and the choices that had brought them to this night, of the losses and triumphs, of the children grown and gone. "Do you ever wonder," Lyanna asked softly, "what might have been if you'd never come to the Tower of Joy?" He traced the line of her jaw, silver in the comet's light. "I wonder, but I do not wish for it. This is the world we made, Lyanna, for better or worse, and I would choose it again." She kissed him then, fierce as the wolf she was. In that embrace, Rhaegar felt all the old burdens lift, leaving only the present, the thrum of blood, the promise of spring, the certainty that peace, once hard won, could endure for generations. Below them, Winterfell's lights twinkled. The north was at peace, and the realm stood united. Beyond the wall, the wild places waited. In the east, dragons, real or imagined, may have stirred. But for one season, the world was whole. And in the heart of that peace, the wolf and the dragon watched the sky, content at last to let the story rest. The snows melted into memory, leaving Westeros awash in green. Each stream and river ran wild with spring's excess, flooding old boundaries, and washing clean the fields scarred by fire and trampling boots. Winterfell's moat filled to its brim, the Godswood shimmered with new leaves, and in the villages beyond, the first market fairs since the long night drew crowds so thick that songs outnumbered old grievances. Rhaegar woke each dawn to the chorus of crows and the kitchen's clatter, feeling the realm's pulse in every mundane detail. A baker's quarrel over flour, a rider's report of a lost sheep, the shrieks of Jaehaerys and Arya in some mischief or chase. It was not the age of prophecy, but the era of small, essential acts. Even the king found himself splitting wood in the yard with Ned, sleeves rolled and laughter free as sunlight. The older men shared quiet, knowing glances. They had grown children on war stories and hard truths, but now gave them a world shaped by patience. On one such morning, Lyanna joined them, hair wild from the wind. "You'll dull that blade, husband," she teased, watching Rhaegar's awkward efforts at the block. "I dull them so the realm sleeps well," he replied, winking. Ned grinned, passing Rhaegar a canteen. The king drank deep, water cold and sweet, and for a moment, the weight of his crown seemed lighter than it had ever been. They walked the grounds, Lyanna greeting every servant by name, pausing to check a child's scraped knee or offer counsel to a smith. Old Lady Barbary, once the bane of every council meeting, now smiled at Lyanna's approach and pressed honeyed oatcakes into her hand. "You made the wolves and dragons friends, my queen. The land's healed because you healed us." Lyanna's face colored, but she squeezed the old woman's arm and moved on, weaving through a crowd of washerwomen with Jaehaerys in tow. The North had never known such openness. Visitors came in a constant stream. Septons and maesters, traders with heavy carts, hedge knights seeking service, minstrels peddling tales of the wars, now softened into fable. The children learned Braavosi counting rhymes from a passing merchant, and the stable boys grew adept at mimicking Summer Island accents. In the halls, the language of Westeros shifted, softened by new words and laughter. That evening, as dusk fell, Winterfell's towers blazed with lanterns. The great hall was crowded for the monthly open council. Lyanna sat at Rhaegar's right, Elia beside her, Ned across with the seats reserved for lords and small folk alike. Sansa, now nearly grown, served as scribe, while Bran kept the minutes by sketching everything he heard: wolves beside carts, old crones next to knights. A brewer from the Barrowlands stood first, recounting how a flooded ford cut off his wagons. "We could mend it with stone from the old keep," he said, "if House Manderly will lend men." Manderly, large and ruddy, nodded. "We'll send 50 before the moon turns." Rhaegar made it so with a word, the crowd murmuring approval. A mother from the Wolfswood petitioned for a healer to be sent. Her babe burned with fever. Lyanna rose, gestured for the woman to bring the child, and took her pulse herself. "Send Maester Luwin at dawn," Lyanna commanded. "The queen of the realm, tending to my Rosie," the mother whispered in wonder as she left. Even the old quarrel between the Umbers and the Karstarks, land as always, ended not in shouting, but in a wager of who could reap the first harvest. The hall erupted in applause. Rhaegar met Ned's gaze and saw relief. This was what they had fought for: a land where disputes were sport, not blood feud. When the session ended, Rhaegar lingered, signing letters, then joined Lyanna on the ramparts. Below, Arya and Jon dueled with wooden swords by torchlight, their shadows long on the stones. Elia sang to Rhaenys and Sansa in a circle near the well, the melody lilting and foreign. Rhaegar and Lyanna walked, hands joined as the moon rose. "We make a good court," Lyanna murmured. "Better than the ones from your stories." He nodded, brushing her cheek. "Because you taught me what a kingdom is. Not banners, not gold, this. People with lives worth mending. Not Denol. And worth defending," she added softly, eyes reflecting moonlight. As months spun on, the ties between houses thickened. Invitations came for every kind of celebration. Weddings in the Vale, a knighting in Old Town, a new lighthouse opening at Pike. Rhaegar and Lyanna traveled often, sometimes together, sometimes sending one of the children as envoy. Aegon rode south for a season, learning from Garland Tyrell, and the red wines the arts of governance and harvest. Rhaenys sailed to Dragonstone, staying months with Viserys, her uncle's court full of language and laughter. Jaehaerys spent time at the Citadel, where his wit and gentle curiosity made him a favorite among the Greybeards. Jon Snow's reputation grew with every passing year. The Night's Watch, bolstered by wildlings and exiles alike, became a border of hope rather than a prison. Jon himself married Ygritte, the spearwife who tamed his frown with her smile and fierce love, and their children grew up knowing both the Godswood and the open snow. Arya, untamed as ever, traveled east, sailed south, hunted with Dothraki, and once, if rumor could be believed, taught swordplay and bravas under a false name. Bran's gifts deepened. In dreams, he walked farther than any crow or wolf. He saw the veins of the land, learned the histories no maester could write. He became a counselor not only to Rhaegar, but to all the lords who now sought wisdom from the boy who spoke for the old gods. In his letters to the king, he cautioned of storms on the eastern steppe, of a fire priest gathering followers in Volantis, of the need for patience with the Ironborn. In the west, Tyrion Lannister hosted scholars and merchants at Casterly Rock, his humor as sharp as ever, but his rule gentle. He commissioned books and music, built new schools, and established a fund for orphans, sending yearly letters to Rhaegar, reporting the progress of his little lions. When his sister Cersei died, peacefully at last, her ambitions long since outlived, he mourned her, then poured all his cunning into keeping peace. The wall itself changed. Where once men saw only ice and exile, now stood a thriving line of villages, their roofs smoke dark and snug, surrounded by fields of barley and hearty apples. Giants traded stone for iron, and taught children their songs. Free folk sent representatives to the king's council, their fierce independence softening with time. On clear nights, the aurora danced above, bright and silent. Old enmities fell away. Gendry Baratheon, Lord of Storm's End, married Margaery Tyrell, uniting Stag and Rose in a festival that drew half the realm. Sansa Stark wed a lord of the Reach, her children's hair a blend of red and gold, her rule as clever as her grandmother's. No longer did houses measure strength in blood alone. The strongest were those who mended roads and opened markets, who gave refuge to strangers, who celebrated each new birth with joy instead of fear. Years slipped by. Rhaegar's silver hair grew thin. Lyanna's laughter gained new wrinkles at the corners of her eyes. Winterfell's halls filled with the voices of grandchildren, cousins, new knights, and squires. Each anniversary of the long night, the torches burned through the evening, and the old tales were retold, not as warnings, but as memories. A time when unity was forged, when hope did not break. On one such night, as the fire crackled low, Rhaegar took up his harp, the strings worn but true. He played not the old, mournful songs of prophecy and doom, but a simple northern air, learned from Lyanna on a snowy morning long ago. The children stilled, listening. When the last note faded, he set the harp aside and looked at his family, his friends, his realm. "We are the sum of our stories," he said, voice trembling. "And tonight the tale is ours to tell." They toasted him, and each other, with sweet wine and honey cakes, with laughter and tears, until the first hint of dawn painted the windows. In the east, far beyond even the Dothraki Sea, rumors rose of a new Khalasar, a prince with hair white as snow and eyes of molten gold. In Yi Ti, an empress dreamed of dragons, and her priests watched the western sky for omens. In Old Town, maesters debated the return of magic, while in Sunspear, Rhaenys and her Dornish cousins prepared for another round of feasts and races. But in Winterfell, in the quiet at the end of an age, Rhaegar and Lyanna walked the Godswood, hand in hand, beneath leaves now gold and scarlet. Bran's raven circled overhead, a direwolf's howl echoed beyond the walls. They paused before the heart tree, where the red sap flowed as it always had, witness to joy and grief alike. Lyanna pressed her forehead to the bark, murmuring a prayer. Rhaegar closed his eyes, hearing the echo of music in the rustling branches, the promise of tomorrow in the cool, damp earth. At last they turned homeward, the halls behind them bright with life, their footsteps quiet as the peace they had forged. And as the moon rose, silvering the stones in the fields beyond, it seemed for a moment that every wound was healed, every loss redeemed, every hope fulfilled. In the heart of the north, beneath ancient boughs, the king and queen walked on, ready for all the stories yet to come.